Relax, leave this video in the background and go do another activity. Study, work, or just rest. Imagine for a moment that you are a witness to the most violent and beautiful moment that has never existed in the history of the championship. You are floating in the middle of a cosmic cauldron, where the temperature is so extreme that would make the center of the sun looks like an ice cube. Everything around you is boiling, bubbling, pulsating with such a mysterious energy that not even atoms can exist. Is the 10th newborn, and you are about to witness the birth of something that will change reality forever. But before you relax and keep listening to this story, epic while doing other things, if this content helps you while you are studying, you work or rest, subscribe now. It only takes 2 seconds and helps us enormously. For thousands of years, this primordial hell continued, burning like the most powerful forge. You can imagine the reflection. It was an ocean of incandescent plasma, a cosmic soup where particles and foam danced in an absolute frenzy. It was as if the whole cosmos out a gigantic popcorn-making machine. But instead of, you had protons and electrons bouncing all over the place. No atom could form because the heat was so brutal that any attempt at union instantly did. It was a world where the rules we know, they simply did not work, where matter as we know it. It was completely impossible. But then, after 380,000 years of this absolute chaos, something magical started to happen. The temperature finally dropped enough for the most important event to take place. In the history of light, it was as if the boy would have been holding my breath for millennia and could finally exhale. Electrons, who had been running like crazy all over the cosmos, have finally achieved something extraordinary, fell in love with protons. And when an electron hugs a proton, not only is a hydrogen atom born, but something even more incredible is also born. In that moment of cosmic union, a small package of pure energy is released that shoots out at the fastest speed of the universe. That pack of energy was our protagonist, an ancestral photon, that the most epic adventure was about to begin. Never told. It was as if the boy had given birth to a cosmic messenger destined to travel throughout the history of the cosmos. While you are listening to this right now, that same type of photon could be reaching the Earth after having traveled since before they existed. The stars was a born who had chosen the perfect time to be born. Just when the boy became transparent for the first time, imagine you are like a cosmic detective, following the tracks of a mystery that began before galaxies existed, or any form of life. This photon was born in a mirror, who had just changed the rules of the game forever. Before this crucial moment, the cosmos, it was like being trapped into the thickest fog you can imagine, where you can't even see your own hand in front of your face. Light was born and died in fractions of a second, constantly colliding with free particles, like a cosmic pinball completely out of control. But now, with the first atoms forming, it was as if the longest highway and our photon had a clear path to travel without obstacles to unbelievable destinations. It was the perfect time to begin a longer-lasting odyssey, of which your mind can actually. We are talking about of crossing such vast distances that make a trip around the world looks like walking from your bed to the refrigerator. And so began his journey into the unknown, going through what scientists poetically call the dark ages of... It was as if our photon was a brave explorer, entering a completely unexplored territory, where there were no maps, there were no guides, and there were definitely no traffic signs. For millions of years, our photons sailed through a cosmos, completely silent and dark, like a lonely traveler in an infinite ocean of absolutely nothing. There were no stars shining like headlights in the distance. There were no galaxies spinning like cosmic eddies. There was absolutely nothing, except gravity working slowly. Gravity was like an invisible architect that had the most ambitious plans of the universe, slowly molding the first designs, then what one day would become the most beautiful structure ever created. It was as if the cosmos were a work of art under construction, and only gravity had the secret sketch of what would come next. Our photon went ahead, completely unrelated to this construction process, cosmic, that was happening around it. Was like a tourist passing through a city, without realizing that they are being built monumental skyscrapers next to it. Perceive nothing of this cosmic drama, because as you will discover later in this story, for him time simply does not exist. Eventually, something absolutely spectacular began to emerge from the primordial darkness. The first stars of the universe. But these were no ordinary stars like our sun. Were real giant monsters. Unstable and temperamental, as cosmic dragons shone, with such a fierce intensity that it would make our sun looks like a lighted candle compared to a lighthouse. These primordial stars were the real factories of iron elements, transforming simple and boring hydrogen in more complex and exotic elements through nuclear alchemy that happened in their burning cores. When they finally exploded as supernovae, were like most spectacular ever seen, but the size of entire solar systems. Scattered throughout the cosmos, the ingredients needed to form rocky planets. And eventually, life itself. It was as if they were cosmic chefs, preparing the most complex recipe, where every explosion added new ingredients to the primordial broth. Some of these giants collapsed to form the first black holes that began to devour everything around them as cosmic vacuum cleaners, with an appetite absolutely insatiable. Were like princesses, invisibles that grew stronger with every bite, preparing to convert in the architects of future galaxies. But our ancestral photon continued on its way, completely indifferent to this cosmic light show that would have left any observer breathless. Was as if he were a traveler, blindfolded, crossing the most impressive festival in, without realizing absolutely nothing, while the first galaxies were beginning to form like glowing islands of light in the dark ocean of space. He continued his straight and unperturbed journey, was a silent witness of the most epic transformation ever to occur, but a witness who did not see, did not hear, and felt nothing of what was going on around him. Galaxies evolved, matured and filled with billions of stars, who were born and died in cycles, epics of creation and destruction. Was a cosmic ballet of such indescribable beauty that would make Los Angeles cry, where every star was like a dancer, performing his final performance in an explosion of glory. Millions of years became billions of years ago, and the desert was transformed from a simple and boring place in the most complex cosmic symphony never composed. But our photon went on tirelessly, as if time was just a suggestion I had decided to ignore. Completely was like a cosmic runner who never tires of it, never stops, and never looks back to see the road you have traveled. During all this time, something subtle but inevitable was happening with our traveling photon. All this time, the confrontation continued, expanding like a giant balloon that someone is constantly inflating. And this had a direct effect on our cosmic messenger. Its energy began to stretch along with the space itself, as if it were a spring, cosmic, that is gradually lengthening without ever being broken. The light that was born blue and energetic, full of youthful vigor, gradually shifted into the red, losing energy not because he got tired, like an exhausted runner, was because himself was expanding under his feet, like a cosmic treadmill. It was like running on a ribbon, constantly accelerating in the opposite direction, where your speed remains the same, but your progress, relative, is constantly changing. This phenomenon that scientists called by the poetic name of corrimiento, to cosmological red, is one of the most elegant proofs that we live in an expanding universe. It is as if the cosmos was a musician who is constantly lowering the tone of his song, making each note a little lower than the previous one. Our photon had become a cosmic chronometer, carrying in its own energy the story of how much the universe had expanded. Since birth, was a living archive of cosmic history, a book of history written in light that any scientist intelligent enough could read. After almost 14 billion years of journey through the deepest void, something finally appeared on the horizon of our photon. A gigantic spiral galaxy that rotated Ollie like a cosmic pool made of hundreds of billions of stars. Was like a city of light so vast that your complete understanding escaped any individual mind. Inside this galaxy, in one of its most ordinary spiral arms, shone a completely average yellow star. Was the type that exists for the billions in the universe. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary, just one more in the crowd. But orbiting this all-common star, there was something that was the opposite of common. A small greenish-blue dot that had developed something completely extraordinary. Was a rocky planet who had won the biggest cosmic lottery of all. Oceans of water, oxygen 1 atm breathable. And something that yellow had taken billions of years to create. That something was intelligent life beings who had developed the ability to watch to the stars and ask questions about its origin. Creatures that had learned to build tools, developing science and creating technology, capable of detecting the light that had traveled from the far reaches of the cosmos. Our photon had finally arrived at its destination, after a longer-lasting odyssey. That these intelligent creatures could really understand was as if there had been traveled throughout the history of, to arrive at exactly this moment, exactly to this place. In his last moments of freedom, the photon approached the Earth and headed toward a metallic object orbiting. Silently, the blue planet was a space telescope, one of the most sophisticated creations of a species that had learned to look to the stars with infinite sensitivity. This telescope was like a gigantic eye, floating in a vacuum designed specifically to capture messengers as our photon. Was the result of thousands of years of scientific evolution, where generations of humans had built on the knowledge of their predecessors. to create this technological marvel. When it finally collided with the telescope sensors, the story of our photon came to an end in the most beautiful way possible. Its energy was absorbed, transformed into an electrical signal, and recorded by computers that would translate your message in scientific data that would help humans to better understand aging. In that final instant, our photon disappeared forever. His long journey had come to an end after an epic adventure. But here comes the most incredible, the most disturbing, and the most beautiful thing in all this history we have just told, although we have just narrated an odyssey, almost 14 billion years old. A history that spans from the birth of the hero into the modern era of space exploration. From the perspective of the photon, absolutely none of this had happened to him. All this epic adventure had been instant, like a flicker that lasted forever and at the same time lasted absolutely nothing. His birth and death had occurred at the same time, as if it were a movie, which reproduces and ends in the same second. I had not perceived the passage of time. I had not seen the stars come and go, like cosmic, had not witnessed the formation of galaxies or the emergence of life. It was as if he had jumped directly from the moment of its creation until the moment of its destruction, without going through all the epic events in the medium. And this paradox, apparently impossible, leads us straight to one of the questions, deeper and more disturbing, of all modern science: what light really is. How can something that clearly exists and travels in the desert for billions of years at the same time experience all that as if absolutely nothing had happened? Is as if the light was a magician who can be in two places at the same time, or as if he were a time traveler who can, skipping entire eras without aging for a second. This question has tormented to the brightest minds of mankind for centuries, provoking epic debates, scientific revolutions, and smiles that changed forever our understanding of reality. The answer will take us through scientific battles, legendary among intellectual giants, revolutionary castles that destroyed everything we thought we knew, such strange and disturbing ideas that challenge everything we think we know on how works. From the earliest Greek philosophers that thought the light came out of our eyes, like invisible laser beams, to modern physicists who discovered that the light can be in two places at the same time. The story of how we understand light is also the story of how we learn to understand on Tuesday itself. But to get there, to understand these that have confused scientists for generations, we need time travel. We need to go to a time when humans believed even stranger things, on aging of those we believe today. An era where ideas on the light were so different from ours. That would look completely crazy. A time when a man named Edwin Hubble, the same astronomer who discovered that the universe is expanding, not yet born, and where the most epic battles in the history of science were about to begin, with the very nature of light as the final prize. while our ancestral photon continued its epic journey through the cosmos. Something came out, was happening in the mirror around it. I was not traveling alone through that endless cosmic ocean. Like a castaway, lost in the vastest sea you can actually imagine, was part of an invisible billion-dollar armada, and billions of other photons, each one born at different times in history, cosmic. It was as if the castle was a gigantic factory of light that never stops producing, constantly sending luminous messengers in all possible directions. Some of these photons were born in the first stars of the universe, other in supernova explosions that released more energy in seconds than our sun in all its life, and they all traveled together like an invisible cosmic caravan, carrying in their different energies, the complete history of the championship. But there was something even more incredible. On this armada of light that crossed the cosmos, around us, not all of these photons were the same, far from it. We're like a cosmic orchestra where every instrument plays a different note. Some had energies so low that they were practically undetectable, radio waves that stretched for whole kilometers, like invisible giants. Others were as energetic that could go through your entire body without you realizing it, like ghosts of pure energy. There were gamma rays so powerful that a single particle could cause more damage than 1,000 lightning strikes. X and hearts so soft that they could only heat your food. The boy was playing, flooded with different types of light, an invisible spectrum that surrounded our planet, like an ocean of tears that we cannot see or feel. Our protagonist Photon, of course, had no idea that most of these lights would be completely invisible to human eyes. It was as if it were part of a cosmic parade, where the majority of the participants are completely transparent, and you couldn't know it because, as you may have noticed, human eyes did not even exist yet in the desert. In fact, billions of years would be missing before a species evolved smart enough as if to look up at the stars and wonder what the hell it was, all that light coming from space. These types of invisible light only began to be understood by humanity very recently, in cosmic terms, at the end of the 19th century. When it happened, another scientific revolution that would change forever our understanding of reality. And it all began with a young Italian named Guglielmo Marconi, who in 1895 was only 21 years old and worked on his family's property near Bologna. Was a dreamer with an idea that most people thought it was completely crazy, sending messages over the air without the need for cables. Imagine if someone told you today that they can send thoughts directly to your mind without any device. That was basically the reaction people had when Marconi explained his vision at that time. The world had already gone through the telegraph revolution, where electrical signals could travel long distances through copper cables, crossing countries, continents, and even entire oceans. But this technology required a massive physical infrastructure. Thousands and thousands of kilometers of buried cables were hanging on poles all over the world. Marconi had a much more ambitious vision, and apparently impossible, wanted his messages to travel completely free, wireless, without physical connections, as if they were messages carried by invisible spirits. Wanted them to travel through the air, like ghosts of information that could appear anywhere in the world, instantly. For most people, this sounded like pure magic, something that violated all known laws of physics. How the hell can something travel from one place to another without one too physical to carry it? Was like pretending that a letter could reach its destination without letter carrier, without a postal truck, and without even a messenger. But Marconi had studied the work of other scientists, that they had learned something absolutely revolutionary on the nature of electricity and magnetism. The answer to how this would be possible would come from another science giant, a Scottish genius who had arrived at Cambridge University in 1850. At only 19 years old, his name was James Clerk Maxwell. And he was one of those university prodigies that make all other students feel like complete idiots, was shy, eccentric, and brilliant in a way that frightened his teachers, with such a peculiar sense of humor that sometimes no one understood whether I was joking or being completely serious. When he arrived at Cambridge, was informed that all students were required to attend religious at 6 a.m. With his wild humor, Maxwell simply playing, "I do believe I can stay awake until that time," was the kind of answer that left everyone not knowing whether he was a genius or a rebel, or maybe both. But behind that peculiar humor, a mind was hidden absolutely extraordinary that was about to change forever. Our understanding of aging, Maxwell would be responsible for unifying two of the most worrying phenomena of the physics of his time, electricity and magnetism. Since ancient times, humans knew that certain materials could generate strange forces when could attract small objects as if they had a life of their own. Also knew that there were certain magic stones that had the almost magical ability to always aim northward, as if they were natural compasses who knew secrets about the orientation that humans did not understand. For thousands of years, these two phenomena seemed to be completely separate, as if they were two guys, different kinds of magic that operated with completely different rules. But in the 19th century, a series of experiments began to show something absolutely incredible. These two apparently separate phenomena were intimately connected in a way that no one had imagined. It was like discovering that two completely different languages. In reality, they are dialects of the same original language. Scientists discovered that the electric currents could generate magnetic fields, as if electricity had the secret power to create magnetism out of nowhere. And even more impressive, discovered that magnetic fields in motion could induce electric current in conductive cables, as if magnetism could give life to electricity. It was as if one were constantly dancing with the other in an invisible choreography that no one had noticed before Maxwell commissioned something that went much further than any other scientist had seen before. By carefully studying all the equations they described, these electrical and mechanical phenomena realized that they were not isolated and separate laws, but parts of the same fundamental reality. Was like a detective who finally sees that all the clues to a case, apparently confused, actually point to the very culprit. With a breathtaking mathematical elegance, Maxwell rewrote them in a way that reduced all the apparent complexity to 4 fundamental equations, 4 lines of mathematics that contained all the secrets of electricity and magnetism, and thus modern electromagnetism was born. One of the most powerful and beautiful theories of all science, but Maxwell's genius didn't stop there. He had a smile that led him to do something that would change the world forever. Had an absolutely bold idea. What would happen if we applied these classical equations to vacuum, absolute to nothingness itself? It was like wondering what happens if you play soccer in a place where there is no gravity, air, or even ground to step on. In theory, in the perfect vacuum, there should be absolutely nothing. No electrical charges or currents, nor magnetic fields, just the purest nothing you can imagine. But Maxwell wanted to explore what would happen if for some reason he were able to. An electric field was activated in that perfect emptiness, as if someone was lighting a flashlight. In the absolute darkness of space, to understand what Maxwell discovered. Imagine pinching the skin on the back of your hand, and you release it, the skin immediately returns to its natural state. Fast if you are young, slower if you already have a few decades in your body. With electric fields, Maxwell discovered that something similar was going on. When an electric field is perturbed, tends to return to its state of equilibrium, as a spring returning to its original position. But in the process of returning to balance, Maxwell discovered that something absolutely incredible was going on, and completely unexpected. That pinch in the electric field did not simply return to balance and the story was over, but generated a magnetic field, completely new out of nowhere. It was as if pinching reality in a place caused something to appear completely different elsewhere. And here comes the part really amazing about this boy. That new magnetic field that had just appeared on his part also returned to its state of equilibrium. But in doing so, it generated another electric field, completely new, which in turn generated another magnetic field that generated another electric field, and thus, successively, in an infinite cycle. What Maxwell had learned was a continuous and eternal regeneration between electricity and magnetism, where one fed constantly the other in a dance, cosmic, that never stopped. It was as if I had learned a motion machine, perpetual, made of invisible fields, where the energy was transformed constantly from electric to microwave and vice versa, without ever getting lost, and like the waves propagating in a lake after a stone falls into the water. These oscillations extended throughout space at a specific speed. And this is where Maxwell made the discovery that would change forever our understanding of light and the whole universe. When he calculated the speed to which these invisible waves of electricity and magnetism would travel through the void, found a number that was incredibly familiar to him. Exactly. The speed of light that other scientists had measured. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the deepest revelation on the nature of reality. At that time, everything connected in Maxwell's mind, like the pieces of a cosmic puzzle that finally fit perfectly. The light, that mysterious thing that had mankind, since the beginning of time, was nothing more than an electromagnetic wave traveling through sustained space for this eternal game of ping-pong between electric and magnetic fields, was like discovering that something you had seen all your life from afar was actually the visible manifestation of invisible forces, operating according to precise mathematical rules. Maxwell had unveiled one of the deepest secrets of the universe. Light was electricity and magnetism, dancing together in perfect harmony. But Maxwell went even further in his analysis and discovered something that would expand our understanding of aging in ways he himself could not imagine. Realized that if the electric charges in motion generated these electromagnetic waves, then there should be a specific source for all this light we see, and found that source in the most fundamental place possible, in the atoms themselves, in those tiny particles called electrons orbiting around the nucleus, as planets around a tiny sun. When these electrons move or vibrate inside the atoms, disturb the electric and magnetic fields around you in the same way as a stone disturbs the surface of a lake, and theses propagate through space. As waves traveling at the speed of light, carrying energy from its source to any place where they can be absorbed. This was exactly what we called electromagnetic quality, or in simpler words, light in all possible forms. Maxwell also realized that the process was working in both directions, as a two-way street. If moving electrons could generate light, then light reaching an atom should be able to make the electrons move. And that is exactly the basis how vision works. When light enters your eye and reaches the retina, their electromagnetic oscillations make the electrons in the atoms of your eye cells vibrate. That movement of electrons generates electrical signals traveling along the optic nerve to your brain, where they are interpreted as the images you see. Is such an elegant and perfect process that it seems designed by the brightest mirror light. Not only illuminates the world around us, as we thought, but also makes our eyes work as perfect biological cameras. At this point, Maxwell fully understood what was oscillating when we talk about light waves and what caused these oscillations in the first place. But there was an even more surprising detail waiting to be discovered, something that would broaden our understanding of aging in ways that would change forever. Maxwell human technology. I knew that visible light waves that we can see with our eyes had very specific wavelengths, about 1/1,000,000th of a 1 But when he checked his mathematical equations over and over again, realized something revolutionary. Mathematics did not impose any limits to the size of these electromagnetic waves. It was like discovering that a recipe you knew only for making small cakes could actually be used to make cakes of any size imaginable. This meant that other types of light should exist, completely invisible to our eyes, with much longer wavelengths, or much smaller than the light we can see. Electromagnetic waves could exist as long as entire buildings, or as short that were smaller than the individual atoms. Was such a bold prediction that it looked like science fiction. A whole reflection of invisible light constantly surrounding us. Without us realizing it, Maxwell had predicted the existence of a specter, complete electromagnetic, from radio waves to gamma rays, decades before any of these forms of radiation was detected experimentally. It was as if I had written the instruction manual of all the invisible paradise that surrounds us. Unfortunately, this genius did not live long enough to see their boldest predictions confirmed. Maxwell died in 1879 at the age of 48, victim of an abdominal cancer that ended prematurely, with one of the brightest minds that mankind has produced, died without knowing what had happened. The laws that would govern all modern technology, from radio to cell phones. But the boy had a plan to honor Maxwell's legacy in the most perfect way possible. In 1886, just 7 years after his death, the mystery of invisible electromagnetic waves began to be resolved in a laboratory at Karlsruhe University. In Germany, a physicist named Heinrich Hertz was working on experiments that looked like completely academic and without practical application. As is often the case with the most revolutionary science, Hertz had proposed a mission. Apparently simple, but technically challenging. Detect those invisible electromagnetic waves that Maxwell had predicted mathematically. It was like being a ghost hunter. But instead of spirits, was hunting waves that no one had ever seen before. But that mathematics said that there should be. After months of experiments and constant adjustments to your equipment, Hertz finally achieved something historic. Became the first human being in detecting artificial electromagnetic waves. Initially the microwave radio waves, but then came the year 1905, and with it such an extraordinary period for physics, who entered history with a Latin name, the miraculous year. And the person responsible for this scientific discovery was an employee, member of a patent office in Switzerland. A guy who had just graduated from college and had not gotten a job as a teacher. His name was Albert Einstein, and was about to do something that no scientist had previously achieved. Take everything we thought we knew about light and turn it completely upside down. Don't forget to subscribe, because what Einstein discovered about light will challenge everything you have just learned, and will show you that paradise is even stranger than anyone had imagined. While our ancestral Photon continued its epic journey through the expanding desert, something came out, was happening with the light that accompanied it. On this cosmic journey, the cosmos had become a real ocean of different types of electromagnetic radiation, from radio waves as long as buildings, to such energetic gamma rays that could traverse entire planets. It was as if the boy was a gigantic radio station transmitting on all possible frequencies. At the same time, our photons sailed through this invisible sea of energy without realizing that he was fight for billions of siblings and cousins. Electromagnetic, each with its own personality and unique behavior. And as the cosmos continued to expand, like an infinite balloon, these different forms of light began to interact with matter in ways that would reveal deep secrets on the nature of reality. Radio waves of low energy and enormous lengths behaved exactly as Maxwell had predicted in his elegant equations. When they found atoms floating in interstellar space, gently agitated them, like swells that touch the sand of a tropical beach, was perfectly predictable behavior, as if they were following a cosmic instruction manual written by Maxwell himself. These long waves interacted with matter gradually and continuously, transferring its energy little by little, as if they were cosmic masseurs, working slowly on the chest muscles. The scientists who studied these phenomena felt confident that they finally understood how the light worked. Was simply an electromagnetic wave that propagated through space, depositing energy gradually and predictably. It seemed that the mystery of light had been solved forever. But gamma rays, those energy holes with wavelengths smaller than atomic, had completely different plans. When a gamma ray collided with an atom lost in the vacuum of space, the effect was absolutely brutal and violent. It wasn't like a soft caress or a relaxing massage. It was like a cosmic hammer blow that struck with all the force of an invisible locomotive. The energy was so concentrated and devastating that could strip off electrons of their atomic molecules, as if it were a wrecker, destroying atomic buildings with a single blow, did not appear to be a smooth and gradual wave interaction, as predicted by Maxwell's equations, looked more like a direct impact of an energy projectile fired by an invisible cosmic cannon. It was as if these gamma rays were bullets of pure light, traveling at the maximum speed of the... This behavior, completely unexpected, raised disturbing questions that kept awake. To the most brilliant physicists of the time, how could it be that the same light behaved in such radically different ways, depending on its energy? Were Maxwell's equations incorrect after all? Or there was something deeper and stranger happening that no one understood? Scientists began to suspect that perhaps they were facing a completely new phenomenon that defied all known physics. Some began to wonder if perhaps Newton had been right. From the beginning, when I understand that the light was made of small particles, those corpuscles that I had imagined 2 centuries earlier, we would be witnessing the return, triumphal corpuscular theory of light, like a scientific zombie, returning from the dead to torment modern physics. If the light was really a continuous wave, as Maxwell proclaimed, how the hell he could behave at times as if it were a solid particle that hits things. This impossible paradox became one of the most profound crises in the world. Of the entire history of science, the world's most respected physicists were scratching their heads, trying to understand how something could be 2 completely things at the same time. It was as if you discovered that water can be liquid and solid simultaneously. A car may be moving and stopped at the same time. The situation became so that a physicist called William Henry Bragg made a comment that became famous throughout the scientific community, capturing perfectly the frustration and perplexity of the moment. For now, we have to work with both theories. Mondays and Fridays, we use wave theory. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, we think in flying energy packet flows or corpuscles. It was an ironic comment, demonstrating to what extent scientists were lost in a maze of contradictions, apparently unsolvable. It was like if nature were playing a cosmic joke on them, showing them a different side of the light. Depending on the day of the week, physicists felt like detectives, trying to solve a crime where all the tracks pointed to 2 completely different angles, that they could not be in the same place at the same time. The science that was supposed to, that it should provide clear and definitive answers, had suddenly become a festival of confusion, where questions multiplied faster than answers. And while this scientific crisis was developing in laboratories and universities around the world, in a completely different place, something was happening that would change forever. Not only science, but the very history of mankind. In Sweden, a man named Alfred Nobel was experiencing a personal crisis that would take it to create one of the most prestigious awards in the scientific world. Alfred had built an immense fortune thanks to his inventions related to explosives and armaments, becoming one of the richest men in Europe. Its site had revolutionized mining and construction, but had also been adopted enthusiastically for the armies of the world to create increasingly destructive weapons. Nobel had involuntarily become in one of the main suppliers of the war machine of his time. The crisis came in 1888, when a French newspaper mistakenly published Alfred Nobel's obituary, believing he had died, when in fact, his brother Ludwig had passed away. But what really shocked Alfred? It was not the newspaper's mistake, but the title they had chosen for their alleged obituary. "The Merchant of Death is Dead." The article described Nobel like a man whose fortune had been built on the ability to kill more people, faster than ever before in history. See your own female obituary. It was like receiving a cosmic slap in the face that forced him to confront the guy, delegate, who would leave the world. It was really like this, as I wanted to be remembered by history, as the man who had perfected the art of mass destruction. This brutal revelation about how the world saw it hit him like a ray of consciousness that completely changed the course of his life. Decided he didn't want humanity to remember him like a merchant of death, but as someone who had contributed to the progress and welfare of the human species. In his will, allocated most of his immense fortune to the creation of a series of awards that would honor those people that offered the greatest benefits to mankind in the fields of chemical physics, medicine, literature, and peace. Was a way to transform a fortune. Comments on destruction in a legacy dedicated to human creation and progress. Today's Nobel laureates have become the most prestigious awards in virtually all areas of human knowledge, especially in the sciences. Since 1901, these awards have highlighted and celebrated the minds of brighter that humanity has produced in each generation. And it was precisely at the first Nobel Prize in Physics, granted in that inaugural year of 1901, that light was once again the protagonist of a scientific history. Revolutionary. The winner was an unknown physicist named Röntgen, who had made one of the most mysterious and disturbing heroes at the end of the 19th century. X-rays. A form of entertainment, completely new, that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about reality. Röntgen had discovered these yellow rays, completely accident, while experimented with electron tubes in his laboratory. And what he found would change medicine forever, and our understanding of the invisible light that surrounds us constantly. In their initial experiments, Röntgen noted that certain types of radiation could easily pass through materials that blocked completely ordinary visible light. It was as if I had learned a form of ghostly light that could pass through solid objects, as if they were completely transparent. But this was surrounded by denser materials, especially metals, creating strange shadows on photographic plates that revealed the hidden interior of the objects. To demonstrate the power of his chest, Röntgen convinced his wife, Berta, of participating in an experiment that would make history. Placed his hand between the X-ray mirror and a photographic plate for several minutes. The result was the first X-ray in human history. A ghostly image that showed the bones of Berta's hand, floating like skeletons in the midst of invisible flesh. The picture was so disturbing and beautiful, at the same time, that caused a sensation throughout the scientific world and beyond. It was as if Röntgen would have developed X-ray vision of comics. But this was pure reality. For the first time in history, humans could see through the flesh and observe directly the bone structure of living organisms. No surgery or dissection required. At the time, scientists suspected that X-rays were simply another form of electromagnetic light, with a wavelength much shorter than visible light. which would explain its supernatural capacity to go through objects that are completely opaque to our eyes. This definitive confirmation would only come decades later. But the medical application of this poison spread like wildfire throughout the world. Overnight, lightning X became an indispensable medical tool that revolutionized completely the diagnosis and treatment of diseases. Doctors could see broken bones, detect tumors, locate foreign objects in the body, and diagnose diseases that previously required risky exploratory surgeries. Was like if the medicine would have gained superpowers overnight. And to this day, more than a century later, the exams, imaging studies based on electromagnetic radiation are still an absolutely essential part of modern medicine. With this revolutionary spirit, at the beginning of the 20th century, Maxwell's view of electromagnetic waves beyond visible light was materializing in a spectacular way. It seemed that the last secrets of light were finally being revealed one by one. Scientists had already discovered the electron, that particle, fundamental that governs all chemistry and electricity. The waves, radio equipment had been detected and were being used for wireless communications that would connect the entire world. Lightning X had opened windows inside the solid objects that were previously completely only missing, filling the empty spaces in the electromagnetic spectrum. Identify and catalog all remaining forms of invisible entertainment, like gamma rays, reactions, infrared radiation, and so complete the complete map of all the light in the universe. It seemed that was a science about to write the final chapter of the history of light, where all the pieces of the electromagnetic puzzle would fit perfectly into a unified and elegant theory. Or at least that's what the scientists of the time thought. Because, as is often the case in science, just when everything seems settled and orderly, nature decides to throw a curveball that destroys all expectations. A new crisis was waiting in the shadows. Such a profound and disturbing paradox that would force scientists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about light, energy, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. Maxwell had imagined the light like a continuous and smooth wave that deposited energy gradually in the materials he encountered on his way, like a constant rain that gradually wets the ground. And for decades, the experiments seemed to confirm perfectly this undulating vision of the electromagnetic world. When a beam of light hit a metal, scientists expected that the energy out-absorbed gradually by the atoms of the material, slowly accumulating until the electrons gain enough momentum to be released from their atoms. In a phenomenon known as the photoelectric effect, was a simple explanation, elegant and completely logical. The more intense the light, more energy would be delivered per unit of time, and therefore more electrons would be ejected with higher kinetic energy. Was so obvious and predictable, like a garden hose with more pressure wets, faster than one with less pressure. All in this explanation made perfect sense, according to Maxwell's classical physics, and scientists were convinced that they had fully understood this phenomenon. But when finally conducted careful experiments to measure exactly what was going on when light struck different metals, the results were absolutely devastating. For all your theoretical expectations, electrons were not released gradually as expected. but instantly jumped off the metal. At the exact moment when the light touched them, no matter how weak, out the intensity of the light beam, it was as if each individual photon, out a small hammer, that hit the electrons with surgical precision, releasing them instantly. No need for gradual energy accumulation. Even more disturbing, discovered that the exposure time made absolutely no difference. A flash of light of 1/1,000,000th of a second produced exactly the same effect that hours of continuous exposure to the same light. But the real mystery that left all physicists completely confused arrived when they began to experiment with different colors of light, changing the frequency of electromagnetic radiation while keeping everything else constant. According to Maxwell's wave theory, all forms of electromagnetic light should behave basically in the same way, differing only in their wavelength. But it has the same fundamental properties. Blue-green light, yellow and red, should be simply having the same electromagnetic wave, like different musical notes, which are basically the same physical phenomenon of air vibration. But the experiments revealed something that completely violated this too logical and shattered all of Maxwell's elegant theory on the wave nature of light. Blue light expelled electrons with a lot of energy, like small projectiles fired by a cannon. Green light released electrons with less energy, as if they were pushed by a more moderate force. The yellow light barely managed to release some electrons, with very little energy, as if I were whispering instead of screaming. But the red light, no matter how intense it was, could not release a single electron, as if it were completely invisible to metal. It was like discovering that different colors of hammers had different nail-driving capabilities, where blue hammers could drive any nail instantly, but the red hammers could nail absolutely nothing, no matter how hard you used them. This made no sense. According to the known physics of the time, if all forms of electromagnetic light are basically the same thing, only frequency variations of the same fundamental wave, why some of them worked perfectly, while others did not work at all, why the intensity of the light did not matter at all, but color was absolutely crucial. It was as if the angel is those concentrated packets of energy that Einstein had proposed in 1905, represented something completely revolutionary that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about the nature of light. Each of these packages, which would later be named photons, by the scientist Gilbert Lewis in 1926, instead of a specific amount, energy that depended directly on the frequency of light, it was as if every color of the was really a different type of energy bullet, where blue bullets were much more powerful than red bullets. Einstein had note that a red light photon carries very little energy, as a soft ping-pong ball that can barely move a leaf. A green light photon carries more energy, like a baseball that can break a window. And a photon of blue light carries even more energy, like a cannonball that can demolish a wall. This revelation explained perfectly why in photoelectric effect experiments, red light could not release electrons from certain metals. Simply did not have enough energy to do the job. Was like try to open a door with a key that is too small. No matter how many small keys you use, or how often you try, you will never be able to open that specific door. You need exactly the right size key. Or in this case, photons with the correct energy. This radical idea that light came in discrete packets into fundamental units that could not be subdivided became known as the quantization of light energy. It was like discovering that money cannot exist in any imaginable quantity, but only in specific denominations, such as coins and banknotes. You can't have half a cent or 1/3 of a weight. In the same way that you cannot have half a photon or a photon in room, light, according to Einstein, was in indivisible packages, which behaved as the smallest possible units of electromagnetic energy. With this bold proposal, had not only solved the mystery of the photoelectric effect, but had reintroduced the idea that light had particle properties, as Newton had suggested 200 years earlier. But here we come to an absolutely disturbing paradox that would keep the world's brightest physicists awake at night for decades. The light had proven to be a wave. In thousands of different experiments, created interference patterns, was diffractical when passing through obstacles, polarized as it passed through certain crystals, and behaved exactly as Maxwell's wave equations predicted. But at the same time, had also proven to be a particle, transferred energy in discrete packets, exerted pressure on objects, and behaved like projectiles. In experiments such as the photoelectric effect and the Compton was like discovering that something can be round and square at the same time, or that it may be moving and standing simultaneously. The light seemed to be both at the same time, which completely violated our common sense and all the laws of logic that we had developed to understand the world. How the hell can something be two things completely at the same time? The crisis deepened further when the experiments became more successful and revealed something that looked like completely impossible. When scientists were directing a single photon through the famous double-slit experiment, where light passes through two parallel openings, the result was absolutely mind-blowing. A single photon, a single indivisible particle of light, somehow created an interference pattern on the detector screen, as if it had passed through both slits simultaneously and interfered with itself. It was as if a single runner could participate in a race, taking two different paths at the same time and then with itself at the finish line. This not only defied logic, but seemed to violate the most fundamental laws of the reality we knew. An object cannot be in two places at the same time. But apparently, a photon had not received the memo on this basic rule of, and things got even stranger. When scientists tried to spy what the photon was really doing, when they placed detectors, used detectors in the cracks to determine which of the two had passed through the photon, something completely unexpected was happening. The interference pattern instantly disappeared. It was as if the photon knew he was being observed and decided to behave differently. As an actor who changes his performance when he realizes that someone is watching, if no one observed, the photon behaved like a wave and created interference. If someone tried to spy, behaved like a particle and followed a single path, it was as if the light had multiple personality and changed his identity, depending on whether there was an audience or not. This schizophrenic behavior of light led to one of the interpretations in quantum mechanics Reality itself seemed to depend on whether observers were present. As the physicists struggled desperately for understanding this duality, apparently impossible, a young French aristocrat appeared on the scene with an idea that would make the whole situation was even more strange and wonderful. His full name was Louis Victor Pierre Raymond de Broglie, but in the world of physics was simply known as de Broglie. Came from a noble family that had succeeded in resisting the French Revolution, and now he was engaged in both diplomacy and science. But de Broglie had a completely unique perspective on the problem of wave-particle duality of light. Instead of seeing this duality as a contradiction that needed to be resolved, he saw as a clue about something much deeper and more fundamental, about the nature of all reality. In his doctoral thesis of 1924, de Broglie was something that was so radical that initially seemed completely crazy. Whether light could behave as a wave and as a particle, then all particles should also be able to behave like waves. According to Broglie, this duality wave-particle was not a strange peculiarity of light, but a property fundamental of everything that exists in the universe. Electrons, that until then had been considered small solid balls, orbiting around the atomic nucleus, should also exhibit wave properties under the right circumstances. It was like proposing that not only ghosts can go through walls, but also normal humans can be ghosts when no one is watching. Was such a revolutionary idea that most physicists initially considered it to be as a speculative philosophy without experimental basis. But de Broglie did not limit himself to making the proposal, also provided specific mathematical equations that predicted exactly when and how the particles would behave like waves. Their predictions were sufficiently accurate to be experimentally tested, and when the experiments were finally carried out to test de Broglie's ideas, the results were so shocking, which won him the Nobel Prize in 1929. Scientists discovered that electrons, they could really create interference patterns when he passed them off as crystals, exactly as predicted by de Broglie's equations. It was like discovering that baseballs can behave like water waves. If you throw them the right way, even huge breasts, composed of thousands of atoms, have demonstrated this undulating behavior in modern experiments, proving that particle-wave duality is not just an arrow of light, but a fundamental characteristic of all the matter and energy of the universe. With this boy, it became clear that the strange quantum world was not limited to light, but operated according to completely different rules, those we observe in our daily experience. With this new understanding that everything in the universe is simultaneously wave and particle, physicists face the next monumental challenge. Understand exactly how light and matter interact in this strange quantum realm. In Maxwell's classical physics, this had been relatively simple to understand. Electromagnetic waves pass through the electrons like water waves, passing through floatings, causing the electrons to oscillate and emit their own electromagnetic waves. In response, it was like a continuous and fluid dance between fields and particles, where everything was soft, predictable, and gradual. But in the newly discovered quantum world, where everything is made of packages, of how many point interactions, nothing could be continuous or gradual. Everything had to happen in abrupt jumps. in instant transitions, at specific events that happened at precise times and places of space-time. To address this new quantum reality, one of the most brilliant physicists entered the scene, and eccentric of all history. Paul Dirac had a reputation for being the quietest man of the entire scientific community, so introverted that his colleagues joked that he spoke at a frequency of approximately 1 word per hour was so meager, with the words that when someone asked him a question complex, could remain silent for several minutes before giving a 1-word answer that went straight to the heart of the problem. Niels Bohr, one of the most respected physicists of the time, even described it as the strangest man in physics, which, in a community full of eccentric geniuses, was really to say something, but what Dirac lacked in social skills more than offset it in pure mathematical genius and conceptual penetration capacity. During the late 1920s, Dirac embarked on a mission, apparently impossible, uniting the 2 major revolutions in modern physics in a single coherent theory. On the one hand, had quantum mechanics, which described the strange behavior of atoms and subatomic particles. On the other hand, had Einstein's special relativity, that he had demonstrated that space and time were intertwined and that nothing could travel faster than light. These 2 pillars of modern physics had been developed independently and seemed to operate according to logic. Completely different was like trying to combine the rules of chess with the rules of soccer to create a new game, to keep the best of both but out completely consistent. Most physicists considered that this unification was practically impossible, but Dirac was used to believing that the shield should fundamentally be consistent and elegant. After years of obsessive work, telling me something absolutely extraordinary. I need the mathematical equations that unified for the first time quantum mechanics with special relativity. Its equation, known now simply as the Dirac equation, was of a breathtaking elegance and power. Perfectly described the electron behavior. Relativists explained its spin and predicted properties that no one had observed before, but which turned out to be exactly correct. When the experiments were finally carried out, it was as if Dirac had managed to read the boy's mind and write down their most intimate thoughts in the form of pure mathematics. But the Dirac equation had a strange feature, who initially confused him, as when you take out the square root of a number, and you get 2 solutions, one positive and one negative. The Dirac equation also had 2 types of solutions, that they seemed to describe 2 different types of particles. A solution clearly corresponded to the normal electron that everyone knew and loved, but the other solution seemed to describe a completely new particle, something with the same dou than the electron, but with opposite electric charge. Dirac initially thought that this second solution could correspond to the proton, but when he did the calculations, he realized that the mass did not match at all. The proton was almost 2,000 times than the electron, while his equation predicted a particle with exactly the same mass as the electron. It was then that Dirac had one of those revelations that change forever our understanding of aging. His equation was not describing known particles, but was predicting the existence of a completely new form of matter that no one had imagined before, had learned mathematically. Antimatter, before anyone knew that such a thing could exist. The particle that the Dirac equation predicted would be called the positron or anti-electron, and would be the first antimatter particle never discovered. When finally the physicists positrons detected in cosmic ray experiments confirmed that Dirac had achieved something that seemed impossible: use mathematics to predict the existence of forms of matter that no one had ever seen before. Was as if a composer, I would have written music for instruments that had not yet been invented. And then someone would build those instruments and discovered that they sounded exactly as the music had. Predicted the discovery of antimatter, fully validated Dirac's approach, and laid the groundwork for what was to become, in one of the most successful theories of the entire history of science. But Dirac's work had solved only a part of the cosmic puzzle. His equation worked perfectly for special relativity, where space-time is flat and static, like a perfect billiard table. But what if you tried to include gravity in the mixture? What would happen if you would try to do mechanics, quantum in space curve time, of Einstein's general relativity, where gravity bends the space like a waterbed, deformed by a bowling ball? When physicists attempted to combine quantum mechanics with general relativity, the result was absolutely catastrophic. Mathematics exploded in their faces, producing infinite out-of-control and results that made absolutely no physical sense. It was as if Grandpa was allergic to the combination of very small with the very curved for decades. The world's brightest minds crashed into this problem like mosquitoes against a windshield. Quantum mechanics worked perfectly to describe atoms, subatomic particles, and electromagnetic forces. General relativity worked wonderfully to describe planets, stars, galaxies, and black holes. But when you were trying to unite these two theories, everything was falling apart spectacularly. It was as if the boy suffered from multiple personalities, operating under two completely different assemblies and incompatible rules, depending on the scale you are observing. Physicists felt like heroes, trying to repair a working automobile perfectly as a car during the day, but transforms into a ship during the night, with parts that are incompatible between the two shapes. Was deeply frustrating and seemed suggest that something was fundamentally wrong in our understanding of reality. And it was at this point of maximum frustration where the story took a completely unexpected turn and revolutionary. Instead of continuing to try to force these two theories to work together as an arranged marriage, some visionary physicists began to ask and now we come to the end of our epic day, returning to the ancestral photon, with which we start this whole story almost 90 minutes ago. We have followed our cosmic messenger for billions of years, from the earliest moments of the cosmos to modern days, where space telescopes capture their energy to decipher the secrets of the universe. He crossed such vast distances that make you travel around the Earth. Seems like taking a step in your living room. Witness the birth and death of stars, like cosmic. Went through the formation of galaxies as cities of light, growing in the vacuum of space. Witnessed the emergence of life on a small blue planet that moves creatures intelligent enough to build machines capable of detecting their arrival. After an odyssey of almost 14 billion years. However, for him, absolutely nothing of this epic adventure had happened. Had not even lasted a moment. Here we find one of the paradoxes, deeper and more beautiful, of all modern physics, an apparent contradiction that reveals fundamental truths about the nature of time, space, and reality itself. Our photon is almost as old as the mirror itself, has witnessed the entire cosmic history, developing around it as the most spectacular film never filmed. But the absolutely mind-blowing truth is that he never aged a nanosecond. During all this time, while the cosmos changed dramatically and spectacularly, transforming from a primitive plasma in the complex and beautiful paradise we know today, our photon remained eternally young, immutable. Exactly like the day he was born. And all this happens because for a photon, traveling at the absolute speed limit of the time simply does not exist in the way we experience it. This idea may sound completely crazy at first, especially because we have just told a story that clearly lasted billions of cosmic years. After all, the photon existed, traveled through space, left a detectable mark on the corpse, and finally reached its final destination in the modern land. How can it be that something that clearly lasted so long, at the same time has not lasted anything from another perspective? The answer takes us directly to the heart of one of the most revolutionary ideas, who has never conceived a human mind. Einstein's theory of special relativity. This theory taught us that time is not the constant, universale immutable, that we had studied throughout human history, but is relatively flexible, elastic, and completely dependent of the observer who is measuring it. Einstein had begun its conceptual revolution with a simple question, but deeply disturbing, that he made himself when he was just a teenager. What the boy would look like if I were riding on the tip of a ray of light, traveling at exactly the speed of light. This childish and innocent question would lead him to completely the fundamental structure of all known reality. But the path to this understanding had begun long before Einstein. In the 17th century, Danish astronomer named Ole Rømer, working at the prestigious observatory in Paris. Rømer was with observing Io's movement, one of his most mysterious moons, orbiting the giant planet with the regularity of a perfect cosmic clock. Every 42 Earth hours as a celestial metronome. The moon Io disappeared behind and then reappeared, creating regular eclipses that could be predicted with mathematical precision. But Rømer noticed something strange and disturbing in these eclipses that initially did not make any sense. According to the physics of his time, the eclipses of Io did not always happen exactly when mathematics predicted that they should survive, but varied frequently, depending on the time of year at which they will be observed. Sometimes eclipses seem to happen earlier than expected, other times after following a perfectly pattern, with the position of the Earth in its orbit around the Sun. When our planet was closer to in its orbital journey, eclipses seemed to be ahead of schedule with respect to predictions. When we were more distant from the Jovian system, eclipses seemed to be delayed. Rømer had a brilliant revelation that would forever change our understanding of light. These delays and failures only made sense if the light was not instantaneous, as everyone had learned, but had a finite and measurable speed. The explanation was elegant in its simplicity. When the Earth was farthest from the light of Io's eclipses simply took longer to cover the extra distance. To our telescopes, creating an observable delay was like the difference between listening to thunder of lightning that falls near versus one that falls several kilometers away. Romer had achieved something historic. Measure the speed of light for the first time. Using only basic astronomical and mathematical observations, its estimate of approximately 220,000 km/s was far from modern precision, but it represented an absolute conceptual revolution. For the first time in human history, the light had a definite and measurable velocity, which meant it was not a property, mirror snapshot, but a physical phenomenon that took time to propagate through space. Decades later, this speed was refined by other scientists to the modern value we know, approximately 299,792,458 ms. One of the constant, most important and fundamental in all of physics. But this one, too, posed a profound question that would torment physicists for centuries to come. Speed with respect to which reference frame? In our daily experience, when we say that something is moving at a certain speed, is always with respect to some point of reference. Specific when you say that a car goes at 100 km/h. Is with respect to the ground. When you mention that an airplane flies at 900 km/h. Is with respect to the surrounding air, then with respect to what was moving, light at its characteristic speed. For centuries, scientists were convinced that the answer was the luminiferous ether, an invisible and undetectable substance that supposedly filled the entire space and served as a means of propagation for light waves. But in 1905, Einstein made the final and definitive blow to the concept of letters with his theory of special relativity, proposing something that sounded completely radical and impossible. According to Einstein, the speed of light was the only constant, truly absolute throughout the universe. Something that all observers must measure exactly the same value, no matter how they move, where you are or in which direction you are traveling. Was like saying that all the speedometers in the universe, regardless of whether they are in parked cars, supersonic aircraft or spacecraft, would always show exactly the same reading. When they measure the speed of light, this seemed to be completely challenging. Everything we knew about velocities and relative motion, but for this new reality, will work mathematically? Algo fundamental had to give in and change. And what changed was our basic understanding of space and time. Einstein demonstrated that space and time were not the rigid entities, independent and immutable that Newton had imagined, but were malleable, intertwined, and deformed to preserve that constant speed of light that everyone must observe. Was like discovering that the rules of the game could change to ensure that certain results were always the same. One of the most shocking consequences of this new physics was that time actually passes differently for different observers, depending on how fast they move. Not that you feel that time goes slower or faster, is that a different amount of real time elapses for you compared to someone moving at a different speed. For objects traveling at close speeds to that of light, the effects become extreme, to the absolute limit. At the speed of light, time simply stops completely. And here we come to the heart of the mystery of our photon, and the answer to the paradox that we have been exploring throughout this epic journey. Although our photon went through orbit, billions of light years of cosmic space, from the perspective of the photon itself, did not go too far. Absolutely no time between its birth and its destruction. Not even an infinitesimal fraction of a second for him. The moment of its creation, when an electron is attached to a proton in the early universe, and the moment of its absorption in a terrestrial detector, were exactly the same instant. It's as if you jumped instantly. If you got this far, it is because you share this fascination for the universe and the questions posed by each new discovery. Don't forget to subscribe, because we have many more cosmic secrets waiting to be explored. Like us, if this day, epic by the of light, changed your perspective about reality, share this video, because these revelations about quantum nature of the universe need to be known to more people. And comment on what you mind the most. That light is wave and particle at the same time. That for a photon, time does not